Okay, so let's dive into this whole ICC thing. Um, you've probably seen the headlines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went to Hungary.
Yeah.
And at first glance, that may not seem like a big deal.
Mm.
But here's the thing. The International Criminal Court has a warrant out for his arrest.
Right.
And to make it even crazier, just hours after he gets to Budapest, the Hungarian government says they're pulling out of the ICC.
Wow.
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. You have this leader who's being investigated by the ICC, and he gets a full state welcome from a country that's still part of the court.
Yeah.
And then almost immediately they announce they're leaving. So in this deep dive, we really want to go beyond just the surface level news and understand the context, the implications, the different perspectives at play here.
Right.
This is a huge development in international justice. And to get the full picture, we're looking at reporting from Reuters, BBC News, the New York Times, and AFP.
Okay, so Netanyahu shows up in Budapest on Thursday. And it's not a low-key visit.
No.
We're talking the full red carpet treatment military band at Buda Castle, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And remember, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban invited Netanyahu back in November, literally the day after the ICC warrant came out.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like they were sending a message from the very beginning.
It definitely does. Orban's invitation is like a huge statement against the ICC.
Yeah.
And the timing of the withdrawal just hours after Netanyahu lands, that's not a coincidence.
No.
It really looks like they're working together, or at least they have very similar views on the ICC.
And Orban was very upfront about why Hungary's leaving. He said that the ICC isn't impartial anymore. It's become a political court.
Right.
And he pointed specifically to what they've done with Israel as proof.
Right.
And Hungary had already said they thought arresting Netanyahu would be outrageous. So this withdrawal seems like the next logical step for them.
It makes sense. This is something Orban and his government have been saying for a while. They don't like international institutions that they think are too powerful or stepping on the toes of individual countries. He's been very vocal about what he calls judicial activism.
Right.
So the idea of an international court going after a leader for defending their country that goes against everything he believes about national sovereignty.
Right.
And we even saw his chief of staff, Gergely Gulyas, make the announcement on Facebook saying that they're going to follow both Hungarian law and international law in the withdrawal process.
Now, obviously, Netanyahu was pretty happy about all of this. He actually praised Hungary for what he called their bold and principled decision. And then he went even further, saying that the ICC is corrupt and that democracies need to stand up to them. And this all ties into Israel's overall argument, which is that the ICC is politically motivated and they see anti-Semitism at play here.
Yeah.
Like,
it's interesting how Netanyahu is framing this. He's not just saying this is a personal attack on him.
no.
He's saying it's an attack on any democratically elected leader who's acting to defend their country.
Yeah.
He's trying to undermine the court and get support from other democracies who might be worried about international courts getting involved in their national security decisions.
Right.
And when he thanked Orban for his very bold stance against anti-Semitism that really reinforces that line of thinking. And then he even predicted that other countries are going to follow Hungary's lead.
Yeah.
So he's clearly trying to build a whole movement against the ICC in this case. And remember, he had already called the warrant a dark day in the history of humanity and anti-Semitic. He didn't hold back.
No, he didn't. But the ICC isn't just ignoring all of this. They released a statement making it clear that even though Hungary is withdrawing, they still have to cooperate with the ICC until the process is finished.
Right.
Which usually takes about a year.
Right.
And then the Assembly of States Parties, which is like the governing body of the ICC, said they were concerned and disappointed by Hungary's decision, saying that withdrawing hurts the shared quest for justice.
Right. And this highlights a really important point. Countries can't just ignore their responsibilities while they're still members of the court.
Right.
The ICC is basically reminding Hungary that they're still bound by their own statute. And just to clarify, that's the treaty that created the ICC and gives it the power to prosecute serious international crimes, genocide, war crimes against humanity.
Right.
And it's also interesting that even though Hungary signed the Rome Statute back in 2001, they never fully incorporated it into their own laws.
Interesting.
So maybe that's why they felt like they had some wiggle room with the arrest warrant. In theory, as a founding member, Hungary's supposed to arrest and hand over anyone the ICC wants.
So even though Hungary says they're leaving, they still have to play by the ICC's rules for now. It's like quitting your job, but still having to work until your last day.
Exactly.
So what happens legally once they're officially out? What are the implications of the withdrawal?
Well, legally withdrawing doesn't change anything about cases or investigations that are already going on. So the ICC's investigation in Palestine and the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and others, those are still active.
Okay.
Article 127 of the Rome Statute lays out the whole withdrawal process. A country has to send a formal written notice to the UN Secretary General, and then there's a 1-year waiting period before it's official.
Right.
And importantly, even after a country withdraws, they're still responsible for any crimes they committed while they were members. That's a key thing to understand.
Okay, so this whole situation has gotten a lot of attention from other countries and international organizations. There have been a lot of different reactions. The Dutch foreign minister, whose country is home to the ICC in The Hague, was very clear that Hungary has to follow the ICC rules for now. But like we said, it seems like EU countries aren't all on the same page about the warrant itself.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some EU members said they were committed to upholding their ICC obligations, but others, like Italy, weren't so sure about the warrant. And France even suggested that Netanyahu might have some kind of immunity.
Wow.
So there was already disagreement within the EU, which probably made Hungary feel like they could get away with this.
Yeah.
But then you have Germany's foreign minister saying this is a bad day for international criminal law and emphasizing that no one in Europe is above the law. And it's interesting because the next German chancellor had actually talked about finding a way for Netanyahu to visit without getting arrested.
Right.
It just shows you how complicated the politics are here. So you've got these differing opinions within the EU about international law, and then you've got some countries that are really focused on national sovereignty, especially when it comes to their allies.
And of course, this goes beyond just Europe. The U.S., which isn't part of the ICC, has criticized the court's decision on Netanyahu. But it's worth noting that Netanyahu did visit the U.S. after the warrant, and nothing happened.
Right.
And then you have Hamas, who condemned Hungary's decision, calling it an attack on international justice. And then Israel's foreign minister thanked Orban for what he called a moral stance.
Yeah.
So you've got these very different reactions that basically line up with existing political positions.
That's exactly right. And these reactions show how divided people are about the ICC's power and whether it should be able to hold leaders accountable, especially when there are ongoing conflicts and sensitive political situations.
Right.
So we've heard from Hungary and Netanyahu. Now let's look at what the ICC and the rest of the world are saying about this challenge to the court's authority.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. What does it mean for the EU that Hungary is the first member to pull out of the ICC? It seems like a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal. It might not affect the ICC's daily work too much, but symbolically and politically, it's huge.
Yeah.
Hungary might set a precedent.
Yeah.
Other countries that have issues with the ICC might start thinking about leaving too, especially if it helps their political alliances.
Right.
And remember, some of the world's biggest powers, like the U.S., Russia, and China, they're not part of the ICC. And even Israel isn't, although the ICC does claim jurisdiction over Palestinian territories.
And this all fits into Prime Minister Orban's foreign policy strategy, doesn't it? He's close with Israel, and he's been critical of a lot of international institutions.
Exactly. Orban's foreign policy is very different from most other EU countries.
Yeah.
He's got this strong relationship with Netanyahu, and he doesn't like the EU or the ICC. He's all about national sovereignty, and he pushes back against anything he thinks is global overreach. And we saw something similar with Trump in the U.S. He didn't like international organizations either. Orban's a bit of a rebel in Europe. We saw that with his stance on the war in Ukraine and a bunch of EU rules.
And meanwhile, back in Israel, Netanyahu is facing a lot of opposition. So having a European leader like Orban support him so publicly probably helps him a lot at home.
Yeah, it probably does. It gives him a good story to tell to counter his critics.
Okay.
The ICC is accusing him, but Orban's welcoming him with open arms. And remember, the ICC has also issued warrants for several Hamas leaders in connection with the same conflict.
Right.
So they're trying to address alleged crimes on both sides, although it's a lot harder to enforce those warrants. And of course, this is all happening against the backdrop of the horrific conflict between Israel and Hamas, where both sides are reporting a ton of casualties.
So to sum all this up, Hungary's decision to leave the ICC while Netanyahu's visiting, especially since he has that warrant out for him, really shows the tension between national sovereignty, international justice, and the influence of politics on the world stage.
That's a really good summary, and it forces us to ask some really tough questions. What does this mean for the future of the ICC? Will countries cooperate with international courts when it goes against their own interests or political alliances?
Right.
It's not easy.
No, it's not. So here's the big question for you. Is this the beginning of a bigger shift in how countries view international law and the authority of global courts? Are we seeing the international justice system breaking apart along political lines?
It's possible.
And what happens if more countries follow Hungary's example and start ignoring the ICC? What does that mean for holding people accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity? These are really complex questions with no easy answers.
Right.
And we encourage you to keep thinking about the different perspectives we've talked about today and what this decision could mean for the world.
Definitely. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. All right. Well, that's it for our deep dive today.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time.